It's Saturday night, and there's only one man who can stand up to tyranny. It's the Weekend Sit and Spin with your host, Nicholas O'Kelly.
That's right, and welcome in to the Sit and Spin radio show. I am your host, your guide, your joyful, enlightened talker, speaker, encourager. I don't know. Welcome to the Sit and Spin. This is the European studios. We're here a little earlier than normal. Normally we would be doing this on Saturday evening, but going to do a little traveling this weekend, and so therefore my wife and I decided that I would just simply go ahead and do the show now on Thursday night here, and that way you can have the video a little bit early yourself. You can get a little update on what's going on in the world of news, and because this week has really been something. I have been trying to avoid the conversation of North Korea. I'm going to be very honest, because frankly, I see it as nothing more than saber rattling. I see it as nothing more than North Korea attempting to get under the skin of Donald Trump. And that comes from a lot of different factors. I mean, the fact is Donald Trump has been talking tough on North Korea for some time. He's been talking tough to China about North Korea, which evidently, supposedly, allegedly, is their largest supporter, their largest provider in terms of outside financial support. And that's really the question over there. Everyone kind of assumes, especially in the media, the talking heads, the people that break this whole situation down, they assume that China has something of a stronghold over North Korea, has a good bit of influence in that country, simply because they are their largest buyer of goods and source for financial support and, frankly, infrastructural support as well. But I think in the past couple of years, and certainly the past months has accelerated, we're starting to realize that China actually doesn't have the type of influence, the type of hold over that regime as it has been advertised in the media, as it's been supposed by anyone looking into this subject. And I think that comes directly from the fact that Trump had the Chinese president Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago so many months ago. It seems like it's been 10 years ago now that he was there visiting with Trump in Florida. You know, but that was, of course, when Trump came out and said, hey, by the way, President Jinping, we just launched missiles on Syria. Sorry for that. And it was a bit of a shock. The media lost their mind over that whole situation. What was thought at the time was that Trump was doing that as a bit of a strong arm to China to say, look, you need to get some influence, you need to get a hand on top of North Korea, otherwise we're going to come down hard on them. Because, I mean, look, I think we're all quite tired of Kim Jong-un running around claiming that he's going to bring fire and brimstone on America. They make these propaganda videos all the times with crosshairs across the White House, saying that he's going to teach the U.S. a lesson and that Donald Trump better watch his mouth. And I mean, the type of, and this has been going on for some time, but it's accelerated under Donald Trump. And I believe that that's just simply because Donald Trump is taking a more strong, steadfast approach towards the whole thing. If you'll remember, during the Obama administration, Obama had more of a blind eye idealism towards this whole thing. And that's what we're seeing the left now begging Trump to do. They're basically saying, look, just allow them to have the nuclear material. Just don't worry about it. Let them do what they're going to do, because if we coddle them, so to speak, then we will have less of a threat. And this seems to be such a common thread from the liberal left, does it not? That they assume that if you would just coddle to those who want to actually pose a threat, who want to take some sort of action, violent or otherwise, against the U.S., that if you would just simply be nice to them and give them gifts, then you will lessen the threat against the homeland, right? I mean, let's think about it for a second. We're talking about our illegal immigration situation. Okay, well, Obama says, well, the way to handle that is just to give them all free welfare. Let's let them know that their children are allowed to come in, and then we'll let the parents come in right after them. Why not? I mean, we'll have less of a threat to our homeland situation. Now, of course, this is more of an economic threat, but they choose to look past the economic threat and just say, let them in. Let's bring them in. Let's give them welfare. Let's give them a good life. All they want is a good life. Let's give them a good life. And then we won't have to worry about the drug cartels trying to come in and commit violent acts against our people or whatever. It makes no sense, but this seems to be the logic. It's the same thing with illegal immigration coming from the countries with refugees now. And the radical Islamic situation that's coming into the country also through the open border, which Obama ordered the shutdown of. I mean, these all tie together because they say, well, if we will just allow Sharia law in certain areas, if we will just be nice to the Islamicists, if we will let them in the country illegally, if we will ship money to their homelands, whatever, then it's less of a threat. We don't want to go after ISIS specifically. We don't want to go into another war. We don't want any. We don't want to take that approach. We want to use diplomatic channels, and that's what the left now is using towards Donald Trump as well. They're saying, look, let's use diplomatic channels with North Korea. Well, I think Donald Trump is fed up with it. And I don't know if I'm explaining myself well enough, but it's really hard to formulate what exactly is happening in the mind of a liberal when they're sitting there saying, we don't need to use force against someone like Kim Jong-un, who is literally saying, that he's going to destroy major cities in the U.S. with nuclear warheads. It's been supposed now, alleged, that they have actually miniaturized a nuclear warhead capable of being implemented into a ICBM missile, which is something they claimed years ago. And if you'll remember, it was debunked by the Pentagon. We had our State Department and the Pentagon saying, no, they are years away. I mean, 10, 15, 20 years away from being able to miniaturize a nuclear warhead. Okay, they can fire off missiles all they want, but it's not going to do them any good because they simply don't have the technology to be able to fire it off with any kind of accuracy that would reach U.S. shores, much less be able to get out of their own area of the ocean. Well, obviously, that's now the idea behind that has completely changed because they have been able to pretty accurately land missiles. They've been going much further. They've been actually launching them into space. Of course, they were parading around their new missile technology and the Day of the Sun and all of that. So now it's become a major threat. So it's no longer just someone over there standing there like a fat clown saying that he's going to come after our children. Now those threats seem to be somewhat justified because the technology is appearing to be there. And so what do we do about this situation? And like I said, I haven't wanted to bring this up because I simply don't want to cause unnecessary concern. We as a country have plenty to worry about. I mean, the economy is suffering. They're talking now about how the bubble is going to burst. You have the likes of Alan Greenspan and other economists now saying the rate growth of the stock market can't last forever. The bubble's going to burst. It's only a matter of time. And of course, that is absolutely true because a bubble does one thing. I mean, think about it. When you're a kid, you're chewing bubble gum, you're blowing a bubble, you want to see how big it can get, right? Well, eventually it's going to pop. I mean, unless you get it just to that spot and you hold the air in and pull it out of your mouth, but then at least it's going to deflate. I mean, bubbles burst. That's what they do. And of course, we are using a fiat currency in America. I don't want to get into all of the economics of the whole situation, but I've talked about it on this show before. I think you know what's going on. We have a paper currency that is not based on the gold standard anymore. It's not based on anything physical. So the Federal Reserve is simply printing more and more money at will, whenever they want, whenever they feel like, and they're manipulating interest rates. And the idea, according to them, is to give the economy an elasticity that will weather certain political issues, things like the stock markets around the world collapsing, things like war or whatever, from affecting our economy. When in reality, what it really is that they keep interest rates at a false low for a certain amount of time. It's very scientific, until the bubble has grown to such a percentage that they can then actually burst the bubble themselves by jacking up interest rates, calling in on loans that they know are defaulted, and so on. These are the issues that we really need to be thinking about, because the economy is in trouble. Trump's trying to turn it around. He's trying to do whatever he can to bring it back. It's chugging back. It's the little engine that could, heading up the hill. We're seeing jobs come back in record numbers. We're seeing manufacturing coming back to the United States in record amounts. I mean, he's doing literally everything he can possibly do. And the question is, when will the senators allow him to simply do his job so that we can get the economy jump-started once again? I mean, it's like he's got the paddles there, he's charging them, and the hospital administrator is saying, look, we don't really have the money to do this. I'm so sorry. And this is what I'm talking about. I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent because I want to focus in on North Korea, but I think this is important to mention, that Trump is insisting that the senators do their job. I saw this week articles about how they're getting such pushback at home. The senators, I mean, you've got and congressmen. You've got Paul Ryan, and that was specifically who the article was talking about, that he's just been being berated at home because they wouldn't push through tax reform because they completely failed us on health care. And the senators have the congressmen have all of these different excuses for why they didn't push through health care. In my opinion, it's complete hogwash, because they've been saying for 7 years that it's not good for the American people, that we need to repeal and replace, or at least repeal. I saw another article talking about how, I think it was 1.5 million people, or maybe it was more than that. Anyway, it was several million people are actually choosing to pay the fine rather than sign up for Obamacare. Now, whether that's because they realize that the system is going to collapse anyway, whether it's because they simply don't want health care. But see, that's the difference, is that now you don't have the option of not having health care. And how is that freedom when you are forced to take on health care from the government? The government who should not even be in health care. The government is not a health care industry. It's not an industry at all. While it may act as our largest corporation in the country, there is no reason that the government should be acting as a corporation in the free market. By the way, taking up the free market in the sense that other healthcare industries are being, or not healthcare industries, but other insurance companies are being shut down because it's almost a monopoly at this point, and that's what they're talking about. That's what the Congress is actually talking about. Do you realize that? Do you realize that when they say things like a one-payer system is what we are moving towards, when the congressmen sit there and say things like the best solution for our economy is a one-payer system, that is monopolization of the market? I mean, we already have major issues with very large corporations starting to infringe upon the free market with actual monopolizations and trust issues. For example, Amazon, now one of the largest, or quite possibly the largest supplier of supplements in the country. They've bought up Whole Foods, so they're starting to make their way into the food industry in general, supermarket and that sector of the retail industry, they've already taken over the main consumption sector of retail with in terms of companies like Walmart. And I mean, Walmart themselves pushed out the downtown retail stores and kind of consolidated it in themselves, and we were all worried about Walmart. And then Amazon has just simply ate them up like the bigger fish that they are. And it's really actually worrisome when you think about it. I mean, do you really want to live in a world where you don't have a store to go to anymore because absolutely everything is online? I mean, of course, it's convenient to be able to shop at your home on your computer. I do it pretty often, but there are sometimes, I mean, what's happened to the people that wanted to go hang out at the mall, right? I mean, it's an interactive portion of our lives where we go out into society, we shop for goods and services, we communicate with people, we have interactions. I mean, it seems like such a simple and silly thing, and very often I know people want to avoid that on a day-to-day basis. If you have a long day at work or something, maybe you don't want to go out into the town and go shopping, but you have to have social interactions at some point. You can't just avoid it altogether. But that's the world that we're moving towards when you have people like Amazon literally buying up everything. And not only buying it up, the convenience factor of their service and the prices that they offer, because they are such a large distributor of so many different products, makes it to where other businesses can't compete. That is a monopoly. When you have pushed other competitors out because they can't afford to stay in business. And like I said, it started with Walmart. But we've completely forgot about Walmart at this point. I had a professor who owned a bookstore in college, and it was just a local downtown bookstore. I love going to bookstores. There are even a couple here in Dusseldorf that we frequent every once in a while just to go see what we might be interested in picking up. Sometimes I like just browsing through bookstores. A lot of times not just for books. They have games and gifts and things too. They're fun to go to. I used to love to go to Walden Books. Do you remember Walden Books? They don't exist anymore. That was like my neighborhood bookstore, even though it was a chain. Completely gone now. Anyway, my professor had one that was downtown in the city that my college was in. And she often spoke about how they were having major issues competing. They were going to have major issues staying in business because the likes of Walmart had the money to release books actually early. Because when you release a book early as a distributor, you pay a fine to the publisher. Well, Walmart, a couple $1,000,000 for them to be able to release Harry Potter a week or even 2 weeks early or whatever. I mean, that's a major advantage for them because they can simply absorb the cost and make it back on the back end. Well, so Walmart starts taking over the bookstores. They start taking over supermarkets themselves. I mean, only major supermarket chains are still around. If you are from South Carolina, you know what I'm talking about with Piggly Wiggly. They've gone out of business. Bilo bought them up. I feel like Bilo's probably on the way out as well. Winn-Dixie, don't hear about them much anymore. I'm not sure if they have any stores open. They've given way to the major chains, which, of course, due to their quality and so forth, are still around, like Harris Teeter and Publix. But they're even having to find creative ways to stay in business, creative ways to appeal to people. Because believe it or not, I mean, maybe you don't think about this, but what drives you to want to literally drive, which is inconvenient in its own right, out of your way perhaps to go to a supermarket? What brings you into a supermarket other than complete necessity? Now, what happens when Amazon really gets its drones going and you could buy, for example, all of your groceries from Amazon and have it delivered by drone directly to your house? What would make you want to go to any supermarket ever again? Well, this is the situation that we're talking about. These, again, I want to bring us back to the focus here. These are the issues that at home that we need to deal with. We have corporations starting to create monopolies that are unchecked by the government. Google, Apple, The EU seems to be going after these. By the way, I saw an article talking about how Apple now is being investigated in Germany and France. They've already gone after Google, the EU has. When is our government going to start looking into these corporations which have GDP, that they have cash flows bigger than the GDPs of some countries? Apple actually owns so much stock in U.S., they own so many U.S. bonds and treasuries that they legitimately could be their own state. I mean, these are worrisome issues. And yet, we are more concerned at this point with the likes of the Russia investigation, which there's been further developments with Mueller now raiding the home of Manafort like he's a common criminal, even though we still haven't seen a raid of the Clinton Foundation. That's a side note. We'll get to that a little bit later. And now this issue with North Korea. But before I wanted to get there, the point of all the talk of the monopolization is the fact that the federal government itself is trying almost, it seems like sometimes, to become a monopoly, especially when they talk about one-payer systems of the healthcare industry. That's a monopolization by itself, and we should not want for that. We should not wish for that, because then that's the end. Once the government starts taking over sectors of, like Amazon, different industries, well, that's the end of the free market as we know it. I mean, I had a problem with the fact that the federal government and our tax dollars bailed out the car companies. I mean, if they can't keep themselves in check and sell cars without cheating or being bailed out, if the banks can't keep their finances in order, I mean, they're banks, for goodness sake, without us bailing them out every 10 years, then that's a major problem. Once the government starts buying up all these industries and centralizing everything, then that's the end of the free market. And yet the senators want to sell us why they are simply unable to
I'm not going to ask for a show of hands.
pass a health care repeal. Take a listen to Mitch McConnell.
Which I find extremely irritating. And I'm going to tell you why. Congress goes on for 2 years. And part of the reason I think that the storyline is that we haven't done much is because, in part, the president and others have set these early timelines about things need to be done by a certain point. Now, our new president had, of course, not been in this line of work before, and I think had excessive expectations about how quickly things happen in the democratic process. And so part of the reason I think people feel like we're underperforming is because too many kind of artificial deadlines unrelated to the reality of the complexity of legislating may not have been fully understood. And of course, our political adversaries would be love to say that anytime. So what I'm asking of you is to judge this Congress when it finishes. How much have we done to make America competitive again and to grow again? And that's part of making America great again, which is what the president talks about so much.
So if you didn't understand what he was saying, the president has set unfair expectations on your congressman. Can you believe this guy? Can you believe he has the gumption? I mean, I guess that's what makes him a public servant, is that he has the balls to get up there and say that there is unfair expectations on his massive salary that our tax dollars are paying for every year, on the fact that he gets more vacation than every other American, period. I mean, their one job, I mean, it's literally the one thing they ran on was to fix this healthcare debacle that Obama created. And for 7 years, they've been kicking the can down the road. And now they have a commander-in-chief, they have a president who is willing to sign the document, who is willing to put it on through, which the only reason they weren't able to do it for the past 7 years was because Obama kept saying he was going to veto it, or he did veto it when something did get through the Senate and the House. And now the excuse is that they simply have too much to do. They just don't have enough time. I mean, Trump he just doesn't understand how the legislative process works. I mean, this is really, how pathetic is this? In my opinion, it is time for Mitch McConnell to go. And I would like to see a complete cleaning house of the entire Congress in general. And I hope that come midterms, the states will reject these establishment people on the left and the right. I mean, people like Mitch McConnell, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, these people need to go. They've been in Washington for way too long. It's very obvious at this point that the only reason they're still there is to make sure they keep pulling in that paycheck month after month. And they're doing a great job of it because they still have that paycheck. They're still living in these massive mansions. I mean, just go look up any of them. Go look up the size of the house that Maxine Waters lives in. Go do a little research into the net worth of Nancy Pelosi. I mean, these people are really unbelievable. And then to stand there and say that the president puts unfair expectations on them because he simply hasn't been in the political game long enough to understand how it works is a slap in the face to all Americans. Rush Limbaugh had a reply to Mitch McConnell.
Okay, here's Senator McConnell. This in Florence, Kentucky. He was addressing the Rotary Club.
I know everybody's saying we've been there, haven't done anything, which I find extremely irritating.
Right.
Part of the reason I think that the storyline is that we haven't done much is because, in part, the president and others have set these early timelines about things need to be done by a certain point. Now, our new president has, of course, not been in this line of work before. No. Part of the reason I think people feel like we're underperforming is because too many kind of artificial deadlines, unrelated to the reality of the complexity of legislating, may not have been fully understood.
Okay, there you go. But he also said that the expectations were too high. But so you see here, well, the president set these early timelines. New president, not been in this line of work before. Part of the reason I think people feel that we're underperforming, too many No. Senator, it doesn't matter that Trump is president. It doesn't matter. For 7 years, Republicans everywhere have been promising, except for Kasich, have been promising to repeal and replace Obamacare. And with every election victory, another excuse was offered. When you get the House back, well, we can't really do it till we get the Senate. So Republican voters gave you the Senate. And then after that, the excuse was, well, Obama's still going to veto it. We really can't do. We started getting the idea you don't want to replace Obamacare. You don't want to repeal it or replace it because the excuses for not doing so were rapid fire. I mean, it didn't take long after each victory for another excuse to be launched. Well, we need the Senate. Give you the Senate. Well, we don't have the White House. Gave you the White House. Now it is we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. It's nothing to do with artificial timelines or the president not being in this line of work. I don't know how this is going to fly. I don't know how the Rotary Club in Lexington, in Florence, Kentucky, took this. But I'll tell you, I've had a thought, and I know Senator McConnell, and I've spoken to him. He's been very helpful over the course recent years. There have been phone calls, not on the air, but about legislation, about Senate procedure, and so forth. He's been educational in that regard. But I tell you, something I can't overlook. You talk about Senate procedure, it's about leadership. Okay, we've got Collins and Murkowski. Where is the effort to turn them? Where is the effort to go get, okay, if you've got 52 Republicans and say 6 of them are not really on board
with
with
agree with that. Where is the effort from your senators? Where is the effort in general? I mean, what is their focus on? Because they don't want Trump focused on a strong stand against Korea. They don't want Trump focused on health care reform. They don't want him focused on taking out ISIS. All they want him focused on is leaving office because of this Russia collusion. And it seems like that's really where the attention is lying for these senators. It's almost like they think that Trump is going to be taken out of office by Mueller, which in my opinion simply won't happen. I mean, the evidence is just not there, and if it was, I think they would have already found it. And frankly, the only reason that this investigation is still going on, I mean, one thing I want to know is how much is Robert Mueller spending at this point of our tax money to be able to investigate our president with zero evidence to do so, when there is just mounds of evidence against the Clintons, which, by the way, they're involved with this Korea thing as well, and we'll get to that, to put them under indictment immediately. And, of course, there has been talks that he is investigating the whole tarmac situation between Bill Clinton and Susan Rice and whatever, but that remains to be seen. What I know is that Mueller is now going in to the back channels of Trump's campaign, all the lower-end people trying to get someone to flip and snitch about what, I have no idea, and who knows. But he's a very highly trained investigator. He's a very good investigative mind. He is good with criminal indictments. This is what this man does. And he's hired a team of 16 lawyers, all of whom are out for blood. Now, okay, that's enough of that. The point here is that I really want to get to some talks about North Korea, because we simply have a mound of evidence, or articles this week about Kim Jong-un and the saber rattling that he's been doing between himself and Trump. Now, the question of why he's doing this now at such an accelerated pace, I think is an easy one to answer. Frankly, I think it has to do with the fact that he got used to Obama having a blind eye approach for so many years and allowing him to operate in whatever capacity he wanted to. And now Trump has come out and said, look, we're not going to let him just run around and make threats against the U.S. And here's the thing. I don't believe that North Korea is actually suicidal enough to attack the U.S. I don't believe it. I don't think that they're going to do that. They are obviously talking about it a lot. We see more and more the threats from them. I have this article here from Reuters saying North Korea ready to teach U.S. severe lessons as UN abused its authority. North Korea is ready to give the United Nations a severe lesson with its strategic nuclear force if it takes military action against it, and it will not put its nuclear program or its missiles on the negotiating table, it said in a statement to a regional meeting on Monday. In a transcript of a statement by Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho, which was distributed to media in Manila, Pyongyang called new UN sanctions fabricated and warned that there would be strong follow-up measures and acts of justice. It said the resolution showed the United Nations had abused its authority. It said its intercontinental ballistic missile tests in July proved that the entire United States was in its firing range, and those missiles were a legitimate means of self-defense. It was not immediately clear whether the statement was read to the ASEAN Regional Forum on Monday or not, however. Now, in my opinion, the reason that this is happening is for one simple reason. I think that Kim Jong-un wants to be taken seriously as a worldwide player. I mean, again, keeping in mind that China for so long has been assumed to be the leash holder for North Korea. Okay, South Korea also, by the way, and it's really interesting to look at the dichotomy between those two regions, because South Korea, of course, is a democratic nation, freedom, and you can see the prosperity that they have. They live very well. Wages are good for those people. There's lots of industry there. The quality of life, I think, is pretty high, especially considering where they are. It looks great when you look at those cities. They look like they are industrialized and so on. And then you go to North Korea and you see that communism is obviously running that entire state. People are starving. They're working as slaves in the fields. It's like the legitimate Hunger Games over there. If you've seen the Hunger Games movies, I'm sure you have. When you have the capital where everyone there has all of the money and the districts farm the land and cut the timber and they're all starving and so on and so on. This is legitimately what's going on in North Korea. You have a dictator that gathers up all of the resources for himself. He lives like a king in that giant palace of his. And that Pyongyang, of course, is, I mean, frankly, a pretty decent-looking city itself. I mean, I think it looks a little imperialistic. But when you see the videos of it, it always seems clean. But then, of course, when you get down and dig into it and understand what's really going on, it's like a ghost town. I mean, the people, it's kept that way so that it looks like that on television. But there aren't very many people actually allowed to live there, and most of the people in North Korea are basically slaves. They have slave camps there. They've got death camps there. It's a literal hellhole, and that's why it's so frustrating to hear the liberal left constantly talking about how great communism is, and you hear Hillary Clinton talk about Mao Zedong being one of the people she looked up to and all this bunch of stuff. I mean, this is what happens when you have communism. It always collapses because it's what they say about Bernie Sanders and his socialism. Eventually you run out of other people's money, right? Well, I mean, the people only have so much money, and when the government takes all of that money, then everyone's poor, and so they are forced to work all the time, and with no wages, they're just starving while they're working. It's terrible conditions. It's horrifying. And yet, I don't know if it's a jealousy on the part of Kim Jong-un that he looks to the south and he sees that the opposite situation is there in South Korea. Of course, he's not going to give up the power that he has. I don't really know if you can even call it power, but certainly he controls that entire nation. And therefore, he's going to keep that power one way or the other, but he looks around him. He looks at China, who is kind of their guard dog, kind of standing over top of them. And like I said, maybe there's a bit of jealousy there. Maybe it's it's some kind of a masculinity thing that he's tired of being led around or controlled over top of him by China. China, of course, also who has some industrialization of their own. And yet his country is basically a hellhole. I don't know. I mean, I don't understand what's going on, but what I do understand is that he wants to be seen as a worldwide player, as a worldwide power, even though they're very clearly are not. And that's why I say maybe there's some sort of masculinity issues happening. And so therefore, I don't believe that they're actually going to attack the U.S. I think it's all rhetoric in order to get the world to believe that he has the ability to do it, and he would do it. Nevertheless, you can't allow a madman like that to run around saying such drastic statements about attacking the U.S., attacking Guam. They're literally talking about firing on Guam now and Alaska and so forth. I mean, we have to protect our borders, and that's what Donald Trump said he was going to do. And if there's a major threat, and now there is, as they're firing off a missile every other week, and now there's evidence that they have actually miniaturized a nuclear warhead, then Donald Trump has to do something about it. He has to take a strong stand on the issue. And, of course, he has a long history of doing that. But, I mean, you can't just allow the rhetoric to continue. At some point, it has to stop. I mean, look at this. Revenge will be thousand-fold. North Korea vows to attack America as Kim Jong-un demands justice for Donald Trump trying to isolate and stifle his country. New sanctions ban Kim Jong-un's country exporting coal, iron, lead, and seafood in joint U.S. and South Korea crackdown. These are all part of the sanctions that the UN, the diplomatic channels that the liberal left is begging for, and the UN is begging Donald Trump to go through. And like I said, he is still trying these diplomatic channels. We are imposing sanctions. He is talking with China. He's trying to find some other solution because we don't want to go in there and annihilate this entire country. And that's what it would be. I mean, make no mistake about it. It would be swift. It would be decisive. It would be extremely powerful. I don't think North Korea would ever be able to fathom the type of destruction that we could impose upon the country, and that's not what we want to do. The other problem is we don't want to do that because it would very likely, well, it would, I think, cause also major destruction to South Korea. And, of course, they're one of our major allies. And they're only 30 miles south of there. So we don't want to go in and start a bombing campaign because you would absolutely have to take out everyone in the country. Otherwise, you would have an unbelievable bloody war on your hands as all of those people are willing to die for the dear leader. As crazy as it sounds, these are scrappy, dirty people who are very much able and willing to go in there and fight to the death, and that is a very dangerous situation to be in. So we don't want to put boots on the ground. We don't want to have another Korean War. We saw how that played out last time. We don't want a repeat of that. And so given that reality, and given the reality that we don't want to also cause damage on South Korea, it puts us in a real tight spot here because we're going to have to do something. I mean, we can't just wait around and hope that he doesn't attack us. And this is also, I want to get into this in just a minute here about what the Clintons did to set all of this up. I mean, this has been a long time coming. And it's very unfortunate because Bill Clinton could have done something to stop all this, but he decided to kick the can down the road, much like Obama has done with the mullahs in Iran and the Iran deal. So the question is, if we wait around, what will happen? Will he actually take his chances and attack us? And if he does, what does that look like? And what does our response look like? Because it would need to be massive. And then we are putting one of our allies also in danger. But take a look at this. North Korea has threatened thousand-fold revenge against the United States for banning exports worth $1 billion following its intercontinental ballistic launches. Crackpot leader Kim Jong-un is demanding justice over Donald Trump's attempts to isolate and stifle his country with a ban on exporting coal, iron, lead, and seafood. The tough new UN sanctions could slash North Korea's $3 billion annual export revenue by a third. State-controlled media carried a statement from the North that promised the move would never force the country to negotiate over its nuclear program or to give up its nuclear drive. It says it will take action of justice, but it did not elaborate. It's after U.S. President Donald Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in agreed to apply maximum pressure and sanctions on North Korea in a telephone call on Monday. The UN Security Council unanimously imposed new sanctions, and they are aimed at pressuring Pyongyang to end its nuclear program. That's always the goal. The U.S. drafted resolution bans North Korean exports of coal, iron, ore, lead, and seafood, as I said. It also prohibits, however, countries from increasing the current numbers of North Korean laborers working abroad, bans new joint ventures with North Korea, and any new investment in current joint ventures. North Korea denounced the sanctions, saying they infringed on its sovereignty and vowed to take righteous action, according to the North's official news agency. Pyongyang would never place its nuclear program on the negotiating table as long as the U.S. maintained a hostile policy against the North, the government reported in their state-controlled news. So this is what it's all about here. The UN is trying to get North Korea to end its nuclear program. And again, imagine, I mean, just think about the psychology of this. And I think it can kind of explain what's going on in the head of Kim Jong-un a little bit. he's being told, you can't have nuclear weapons. You can't have $3 billion worth of exports each year, even though China is a major competitor in that area. I mean, South Korea has all of these major companies from there. I mean, look at Samsung and so forth. They have a lot of revenue, and yet the UN, in the mind of a madman now, I mean, I'm just talking about the psychology of it, the UN is trying to take away his only means of making any money. They are, in his mind, probably unfairly putting these sanctions on him. And so what is he going to do? Well, in his twisted mind, his response is to threaten other countries with war, threaten other countries with military action. I mean, that's what's been taught to him throughout his family heritage. His grandfather did it. His father did it. This is what they do. They threaten military action because what else are they going to do? Are they going to impose some sanctions? I mean, they don't have the resources to be able to actually impose any kind of real threat. The only thing they can do is talk about these extreme responses because that's all they have. They have some missiles. They can shoot them at people and cause some destruction. And I believe that they could. And if that were to be the case, then of course it would incur a strong response from the U.S. I don't think Kim Jong-un is completely retarded. I think he knows that. And so, like I said, I don't believe that he's actually suicidal enough to go through with it. The question is, how far is he willing to go to be seen as this major player on the worldwide chessboard? Is he willing to fire off a shot at Guam and have it land just there off its coast in the Pacific? Because if that was to happen, I also think that Trump, and this is where the left is losing their mind. I mean, you know, Trump does have the triggers in hand. I think he'd be willing to respond because, and rightly so. Like I said, you can't just allow this to continue. At some point, you have to draw a line in the sand. Now, talking about this, I also want to mention the response of our own people. A majority of Americans favor deploying U.S. troops if North Korea attacks South Korea. That comes from a poll here in the Washington Post. A large majority of Americans consider North Korea's nuclear weapons program a critical threat towards the United States. However, they remain divided on which policy would best contain that threat. And for the first time in almost 30 years, a majority of Americans were found to support military action if North Korea attacks South Korea. The poll, conducted by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, offers a glimpse of how Americans are responding to the rapidly evolving tensions with Pyongyang. Just 2 years ago, 55% of Americans listed North Korea as a critical threat facing the U.S. Now, 75% do, making it among the greatest perceived threats in the poll. And notably, the many analysts now suggest that persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons may be impossible. Few Americans are willing to accept allowing North Korea to keep the nuclear weapons it already has. Only 21% said they would support an agreement in which North Korea halted its nuclear program but did not give up its existing weapons. Even fewer, 11%, say they would be willing to accept a deal that would allow North Korea more nuclear weapons. Despite the questionable success rate of sanctions already in place, 76% of Americans favor increasing sanctions on North Korea with strong bipartisan agreement, while 68% support placing sanctions on Chinese banks and other entities that do business with North Korea. So the American people are willing for Trump to take strong action, in which case I believe that he really will do it. And that, for me, that's the more real and present danger, I think, is not that he's going to actually strike the U.S. Like I said, I don't think that Kim Jong-un is that suicidal. I do, however, think that he would be willing, and that's the real question, how far is he willing to go? I do think that he would be willing to strike South Korea, at which time we also have a very difficult decision to make. Because, as mentioned, if we were to make a strong retaliation against North Korea in terms of nuclear weapons or hydrogen bombs or whatever, the fallout in the South would be massive. I mean, I think there would be plenty of casualties also in South Korea, and in my opinion, that's no more acceptable than allowing North Korea to attack them. And as I said, I think that a ground assault and normal tactics, normal military action would be a dangerous situation just simply because of the hordes of people willing to die in battle. It's like the kamikazes in World War II. I mean, these are the type of scrappy individuals that we're talking about, and we don't want our boys at war with them. So what do we do? And that's the real conundrum at this point, because Trump is sitting there with a madman making constant threats, knowing that not only could he potentially strike the U.S., he will more likely actually attack one of our major allies just simply because of U.S. activity. And therefore, we have to do something. But what is it that we can do? For me, studying and digging deep into this situation, I think also a big question is what could we have done in the past? And that's why I really wanted to bring in a bit of a history lesson today. Because lest we not forget that the Clintons also had a major part to play in this situation. And it's very reminiscent of what Obama has done, or what he did, I should say, with the Iran deal. The goal, as you can see from reading these articles, is to find a diplomatic way to encourage or convince these rogue nations like Iran, like North Korea, to end their nuclear weapons manufacturing, to end their program of keeping nuclear weapons. This is one of the reasons also why Obama wanted to get rid of our own nuclear weapons, because he was running around telling Iran to do the same thing. And I guess as a liberal, he felt that that we should do the same thing. But let's take a look at what the Clintons did with North Korea back in the day. The actor James Woods tweeted a 1994 clip of President Bill Clinton announcing a deal with North Korea, suggesting the current standoff was the fault of the former president. And if you didn't see his tweet, it says, "If you never do another thing this week, just listen to this liar." And that, of course, is where Bill Clinton, I don't have the audio set up for the show, but Bill Clinton came out and said that getting North Korea to end their nuclear program was good for the American people. Nearly the same thing that Obama came out and said about the Iran deal, which, as we all know, was a terrible deal. And the Clintons, Bill Clinton was actually responsible for several pretty bad deals in his day. I know so many people look at him as a president who increased the level of the economy during his time and blah, 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 blah. So much of that had to do with the Federal Reserve and the private banks that people just don't understand that Bill Clinton was simply a puppet. And he was really in place to push through all of these terrible deals and legislation which shipped the manufacturing out of the country and set up a collapse for the next president, who, of course, was a Republican, in order to weaken the conservative movement. Anyway, this article here talks about the history lesson of the whole situation. It says there's plenty of bipartisan blame to go around. Here's a quick summary of what happened. The facts: Clinton's deal was called the Agreed Framework. In contrast to the detailed and lengthy agreement negotiated in 2015 under President Barack Obama, intended to restrain Iran's nuclear ambitions, the Agreed Framework, struck in 1994, was only a few pages long. Essentially, an international consortium planned to replace the North plutonium reactor with 2 light water reactors. In the meantime, the United States would supply the North with 500,000 tons of heavy fuel oil every year to make up for the theoretical loss of the reactor while the new ones were built. North Korea's program was clearly created to churn out nuclear weapons. The reactor at Yongbyon was not connected to the power grid and appeared only designed to produce plutonium, a key ingredient, of course, for nuclear weapons. The theory of the deal was that with the plant shuttered and the plutonium under the close watch of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, North Korea would not be able to produce a bomb. There were also vague references in the text to improving relations and commerce. Now, this sounds extremely similar to what we said with Iran, that if we could just get them to shut down a few of their reactors, not spend some of the centrifuges and so on, and allow the UN to go in and make sure that that's what they were doing, then they wouldn't be able to create a bomb. We see how well that worked. Now, a lot of us have probably forgotten about this history with North Korea, and so that's why I think it's extremely important that we talk about it right now, because otherwise we're doomed to repeat, which we already have. I mean, that's what's so funny. If you don't pay attention to history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, we did with the Iran deal. I mean, we had the exact same thing happen with North Korea, and now we see the real consequences of it. Because now we have a madman in charge of the whole situation over there who is threatening our borders. So my question is, what's going to happen in a decade after this Iran deal, after they've been allowed to continue with their nuclear program with no oversight, as was supposed to happen with the UN? The deal was hugely controversial in Congress, just as with Obama's Iran negotiations. Clinton structured the agreement so that it was not considered a treaty that would have required ratification by the Senate. As with Iran, there was also an international component, with South Korea, Japan, and a European agency joining with the U.S. to create an organization to implement the accord. As Iowa State University professor Young-Won Kil noted in an article exploring the political ramifications, he says, quote, "Since the agreed framework took the form of a presidential executive agreement rather than a formal treaty, the U.S. Senate did not need to give advice and consent under the U.S. Constitution. However, the terms of the agreement are controversial and subject to scrutiny by the Republican-dominant U.S. Congress that began a series of congressional hearings in mid-January 1995. Some congressmen and senators demanded that the agreed framework be treated as a formal treaty. This move was resisted by the Clinton administration, but because of the budgetary and appropriation clauses of the agreement, the U.S. Congress was inevitably drawn into the process of implementation and verification of the agreement. So the question then in this article is, how did North Korea get its hands on the nuclear material? Well, that then goes to George W. Bush. He became president, of course, in 2001 and was highly skeptical of Clinton's deal with North Korea. Secretary of State Colin Powell was even slapped down when he suggested the administration would follow the path set by the Clinton administration. The new administration terminated missile talks with Pyongyang and spent months trying to develop its own policy. Then intelligence agencies determined that North Korea was cheating on the agreement by trying to develop nuclear material through another method, which was highly enriched uranium. The Bush administration sent an envoy who confronted North Korea, and the regime was said to have belligerently confirmed it in 2002, just as the Bush administration was mostly focused on the pending invasion of Iraq. And then, of course, everything fell through the cracks. In response, the Bush administration terminated the supply of fuel oil that was essential to the agreement, and then North Korea quickly kicked out the UN inspectors, restarted the nuclear plant, and began developing its nuclear weapons, using the material in radioactive fuel rods that previously had been under the close watch of the IAEA. Japan and South Korea, the key partners, were not happy with the decision to terminate the agreed framework, but at that time, there was little they could do about it. Within 2 years, U.S. intelligence said that that they are concluded that North Korea was using plutonium to create nuclear weapons, which, I mean, that was no surprise whatsoever. I mean, this is this is what we're dealing with at this point. It's hard to believe, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, that the Clinton administration, and that's what's so ridiculous about this, and how much do you want to bet that this was a pay-for-play action? I mean, you see why having Hillary Clinton in office would have been so dangerous. Because while Bill Clinton sold the American people a bag of goods, that sending over all of these oil reserves to North Korea would be good for the American people. He actually said that. What's actually happened is that we have an issue where now we have completely put our own selves in danger as we watch North Korea, who kicked out the inspectors, who did not follow through with the policy that they agreed to. I mean, it was all on South Park was making fun of it with the Team America movie and so forth, where you had Kim Jong-il singing his little "I'm So Lonely" song after the UN inspectors came and he killed them, right? I mean, it was all a big joke back then. But now, as we kick the can down the road, we've finally come to a head where we have a major issue where he's threatening our allies, he's threatening Japan, he's threatening South Korea, he's threatening our own countries because they have now miniaturized a nuclear warhead, according to the Pentagon, and can put it on these ICBMs that they've got in place. I've got stacks of news to get through about this whole thing because it's really, like I said, coming to a head. China holds war games as North Korea tensions spike. The Chinese Navy Air Force flexed their muscles in live fire drills in seas adjacent to the Korean Peninsula, the Defense Ministry said, amid regional tensions over North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weaponry. The large-scale exercises were being conducted in the seas and skies off China's east coast in the Yellow Sea and the Bohai Gulf, and included the firing of dozens of missiles, a notice posted late Monday on the Ministry of Defense website. Now, getting into this issue about the miniaturized nuclear warhead. The Guardian is reporting that North Korea may have the ability for a miniaturized nuclear warhead according to Japan. We also have an article where the Pentagon is confirming it, but starting here, it says Japan has warned that the threat from North Korean nuclear weapons has reached a new stage now that it appears to have developed an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching U.S. mainland. In its defense white paper, Japan's government said Pyongyang's weapons program had advanced considerably, adding that it was possible that the regime had acquired the ability to miniaturize nuclear warheads. Japan's defense minister said that the security threats had reached a new stage after the North conducted 2 nuclear tests and more than 20 ballistic missile launches last year. The report went on to speculate that North Korea had improved the technological expertise to the point where it could theoretically marry a nuclear warhead with a missile. Quote, it is conceivable that North Korea's nuclear weapons program has already considerably advanced, and it is possible that North Korea has already achieved the miniaturization of nuclear weapons into warheads and has acquired nuclear warheads as well. Now, like I said, this has been also confirmed at this point by the Pentagon, so I don't want to just say that this is coming from Japan and that's the only evidence we have. I also have the article here, North Korea, this is from the Washington Post, now making missile-ready nuclear weapons, according to U.S. analysts. It says U.S. intelligence officials have concluded in a confidential assessment that analysis completed last month by the Defense Intelligence Agency comes on the heels of another intelligence assessment that sharply raises the official estimate for the total number of bombs in the communist country's atomic arsenal. The U.S. calculated last month that up to 60 nuclear weapons are now controlled by North Korea. Some independent experts think the number is much smaller, but worst case scenario, we're talking about 60 possible nuclear warheads sitting over there. This is a major problem. And as I think that you can imagine, it should warrant a very strong response from Donald Trump. Do you not agree? I mean, am I wrong when I say that it is his job to come out and make a case for having a strong stance against North Korea with all of this going on? I mean, what would you do? Do you prefer a blind eye? I'm asking the listening audience, because maybe it's just me, but what we've had from Obama for the past years, I don't think is enough when we're talking about real hard evidence that Trump or that Kim Jong-un is now a real threat to our national security. Now, Trump has had a long history of talking tough about North Korea, and I've got an article from Breitbart as well, what he promised, Donald Trump's record of talking tough on North Korea. President Donald Trump paid close attention to the threat posed by North Korea throughout his career, clearly viewing modern presidents as too weak or stupid to stop it. From when he was toying a run for president in 1999, Trump appeared knowledgeable about the subject, urging the United States to take a harder stance to prevent the rogue regime from obtaining nuclear weapons. North Korea is out of control. Everybody knows it, and nobody wants to say it. They're developing weapons of every kind, of every shape and form. Trump said in an interview with CNBC's Geraldo Rivera in 1999. It's getting late. I'm getting tired. He criticized politicians in Washington, D.C. for failing to take the threat seriously. Our weak politicians are too afraid to do anything. They come up with these phony treaties that don't mean a damn thing, and North Korea is going to town. Back then, Trump predicted that North Korea's nuclear program would be a major problem 5 years into the future, condemning President Bill Clinton's treaty struck with the regime. Now, of course, he also came out pretty hard talking about Obama's Iran deal. And so in my opinion, it's very obvious that Trump is knowledgeable about these issues. And I'm glad that he's taking a strong stand, but he's got a long history of this. I mean, this isn't something new for him to come out. And that's what's happened this week, is that he's come out and said that there's going to be fire and fury against North Korea if he continues in the way that he's doing, if he was to launch an actual attack, the likes of which the world has never seen. This is the statement that he made this week that the left is simply losing their mind over. But before we get to that flashback, President Clinton threatens North Korea. It would be the end of their country as they know it. President Trump's tough language toward North Korea is causing many in the mainstream media to clutch their pearls and accuse Trump of being rash and reckless. But over 20 years ago, President Bill Clinton used similarly tough language against the same regime. Trump set the media and Twitter into panic mode when he gave a stark warning to Pyongyang Tuesday after the Washington Post reported that the rogue regime had developed miniaturized nuclear weapons for its missiles. He said, North Korea best not make any more threats to the U.S. This is the statement. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Liberals, of course, quickly condemned Trump's remarks, with many predicting the end of the world on Twitter. That was Senator Chuck Schumer, and he called Trump's words reckless. We need to be firm and deliberate with North Korea, but reckless rhetoric is not a strategy to keep America safe, he said. A New York Times report on Trump's remarks said it was more typical of North Korean propagandists than it was of past American presidents. All it's going to do is bring us closer to some kind of serious confrontation. But now, and this is the liberal left going after Trump for taking a hard stand. With all of this real evidence that I've been covering tonight, I bring these articles to you so that you, the listener, can understand that Trump is responding to serious threats at this point. He has waited. He has tried the diplomatic channels. He has talked to China, as I've mentioned. But now we have real evidence of miniaturized nuclear weapons. We have a madman who's trying to prove that the size of his Johnson is bigger than everyone else on the world chessboard. And we have a major issue where he could strike the South, one of our major allies. He's already come very close to striking Japan, warning shots, but nevertheless. And so at this point, Trump simply wants to do the right thing as our commander-in-chief, and the left is losing their mind. But in 1993, when President Bill Clinton gave perhaps an even starker warning to North Korea in a trip to Seoul, South Korea, Clinton said that if North Korea gained and used a nuclear weapon, we would quickly and overwhelmingly retaliate. It would mean the end of their country as they know it. That's the quote from Bill Clinton. And yet the left had no problems with him saying it. It's only when Trump comes out in the media against North Korea that they have a problem. Now, I have a video here from Trump saying that maybe that fire and fury statement was not tough enough for North Korea. Take a listen.
It was nonsense. That's the word that they used. Do you have any response to that?
Well, I don't think they mean that, and I think it's the first time they've heard it like they heard it. And frankly, the people that were questioning that statement, was it too tough? Maybe it wasn't tough enough. They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. And we're backed by 100% by our military. We're backed by everybody. And we're backed by many other leaders. And I noticed that many senators and others today came out very much in favor of what I said.
Now, immediately we had Susan Rice come out with her statement urging Donald Trump to tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea. As if that's a solution. Just tolerate it. Just don't worry about it. Everything is awesome. Former President Barack Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, wants President Donald Trump to accept North Korea as a nuclear power. She says, quote, "History shows that we can if we must tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea the same way we tolerated the far greater threat of thousands of Soviet nuclear weapons during the Cold War," she wrote in a New York Times op-ed. She urged General John Kelly, the White House chief of staff, to stop Trump, and she pointedly attacked Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who was the deputy assistant to the president. John Kelly, this is a quote, "Mr. Trump's chief of staff must assert control over the White House, including his boss, and curb the Trump surrogates whipping up Cuban Missile Crisis fears," she wrote. Now, I have a couple of videos of the left making statements.
Nuclear war.
Yes.
Like, what are your thoughts on
about this issue? So
Here
here's
are my
Maxine
thoughts.
Waters.
The United States State Department must be staffed up to deal in diplomacy.
Okay.
We cannot afford to be in a war, and I want us to be very careful, very alert to what is happening, and to avoid war. And so I think we can do this with some diplomacy, but we've got to have Tillerson, who is our Secretary of State, get those positions filled for deputy, for assistant, so that we can engage with North Korea. I believe that North Korea is interesting threats to the United States, but I think there are some things that they want from us, and we have to find out whether or not we can work with them on the things that they're asking for. And so this is something that we should be very concerned about, but this is not the time to go bluffing and threatening. This is a time for diplomacy.
Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that Trump is bluffing when he says that there's going to be fire, fury, and frankly power like the world has never seen before? I mean, Trump is not bluffing. This is not a bluff. And it blows my mind that they completely wash over the fact that he has tried these diplomatic channels. The left was losing their mind when he brought the Chinese president to Mar-a-Lago because of what happened in Syria with the missiles being launched at their Air Force base. And now they're losing their mind once again when the diplomatic channels have clearly failed. And now our only opportunity, I think, at this point is to simply take actual action. Now, I don't think that it's going to come to action. I really don't. I think I don't think we can wait on Kim Jong-un to do something himself. But I really don't think that he's going to. I think that this is a lot of saber rattling. I only wanted to cover this issue because it's becoming really a major topic that needs to be dug into and discussed. So here's MSNBC's Farkas, Trump's fire and fury statement sounds like a North Korean leader. Take a listen.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
Evelyn Farkas is an NBC and MSNBC national security analyst and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. She joins us now. Evelyn, first I want your thoughts on what you hear when you hear about fire and fury, but then into a little bit of a reality check. Susan Glasser makes the point that the president didn't learn of this analysis, this estimation by our intelligence agencies that North Korea now has miniaturized a nuclear weapon and is able to perhaps successfully put it into one of their missiles. The president has known about that for some time. So why do you think the bizarre mix of hate tweets against the media and the polls and then this statement about fire, fury, and power?
Yeah, I mean, Nicole, so first, just very quickly, the president sounds like a North Korean leader. You know, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, you know, the son of Kim Jong-il, they all talked about literally sea of fire. That was the threat that they used more often than not. I used to have a huge file folder of all the crazy, colorful things that the North Korean would say and the names that they would call our American presidents. So President Trump sounds more like a North Korean leader, unfortunately, than an American leader. The reality check is that right now, I don't think there's a reason to panic. We have to bear in mind that what this leader wants, he came into power in 2011, very end of 2011 when his father died. He was in his 20s. The first thing he had to do was consolidate power. Then he had to make sure that no one from the outside was going to take out his regime. So first internal control, right? Then external control. He's still working on that project. He wants to make sure that we don't take him out because, remember, North Korea is still one of the original members of the Axis of Evil. You know, we had under the George Bush administration, where you were in the White House, we had Iraq, and then we had North Korea, and we had Iran. And so two of those powers are still powers we're dealing with on the WMD front.
I do agree with one thing in that audio. Is that we do need to? Is that we don't need to panic? I don't think. I don't think there's any reason to panic right now. I think that we simply need to keep in mind the psychology of what's happening, the reasons behind what's happening, what's led us to this point, and why Trump is now taking such a strong stand. He's done it for so long, and I don't think that it's out of his right to do that. I'm glad. This is another reason why I appreciate the fact that Trump is in office more than a Hillary Clinton or, you know, God forbid, a third term from Obama. Is because I think that at this point we need someone who's going to stand in the White House and say, look, either you're going to stop this or we're going to do something about it. Because the Chinese certainly won't. I mean, the diplomatic channels through the Chinese have completely fallen flat. And so now Trump's getting tired of it. He says, look, I'm done with this. I have too much going on in my own country. I don't need to be dealing with this. We're not going to let you threaten our allies, and we're certainly not going to let you threaten our own borders. Now, just before I finish up the show, we appreciate you joining us here on this Thursday evening. Paul Manafort's home was raided by the FBI like he's a common criminal. The FBI used a search warrant to raid former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Late last month, and a spokesman confirmed that actually on Wednesday, using the warrant to seize documents related to the investigation into Russian interference in the U.S. election. The Washington Post first reported on the raid, which occurred in the pre-dawn hours of the 26th of July without prior warning. According to the report, FBI agents working with special counsel Robert Mueller seized various records from Manafort's Virginia home under a wide-ranging search warrant. Keep in mind, they won't do this for Hillary Clinton, who acid-washed documents, who destroyed phones with hammers, who didn't turn over thousands, tens of thousands of emails under a congressional order. She lied about that. It came out in congressional testimony that she lied about it. Never raided her home, but they are raiding the home of Paul Manafort. Manafort's spokesman, Jason Maloney, confirmed the raid in a statement to The Guardian. FBI agents, quote, executed a search warrant at one of Mr. Manafort's residences. Mr. Manafort has consistently cooperated with law enforcement in other serious inquiries and did so on this occasion as well. Clearly, they didn't find anything because, we're just basically getting a confirmation of the raid rather than finding out what happened. A spokesman for Mueller would neither comment nor confirm the raid. The raid came one day after Manafort met privately with staffers on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is conducting its own inquiry into Russian meddling into the 2016 presidential election. Manafort voluntarily agreed to appear before the panel and has also turned over roughly 400 pages of documents, including those pertaining to his work as a foreign agent on behalf of the Ukraine. This Russian investigation is complete garbage at this point, and they are so desperate that now they are starting to raid the homes of Paul Manafort. They're trying to get someone to flip, and I don't have time to go into too much detail on this. We'll talk about it more next week. They're trying to find a snitch in the Trump campaign, and maybe this raid came off of someone having already snitched under him. I don't know. But this, in my opinion, goes to show and further proves the fact that Mueller is creating a witch hunt. He is furthering a witch hunt. And there are so many other issues on the table besides possible Russian collusion that even after a raid on Manafort's home, who was a major he was the head of the campaign after Roger Stone during the Trump election. So if we're just now hearing about a raid on his home in late July, then clearly they didn't find anything because there isn't anything there. We've got North Korea to worry about. We've got our allies to take care of. We've got the issue with our border. We've got Jeff Sessions and the Justice Department going after the leakers, going after illegal immigrants, deporting people. We've got the economy to worry about as Trump is trying to get jobs back into this country. We've got health care, which our senators have failed to repeal. That Trump needs to work with them on, and tax reform coming up. This Russia collusion is nothing more than a distraction, and it needs to stop. Now, I am going to wrap it up this evening. I appreciate you joining me here for the Sit and Spin radio show.